Sound check. Sound check.
Okay, say something.
Something.
All right, good.
Testing 1, 2, 3, something.
That worked.
That works?
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Well, good evening and welcome. Not good evening and not welcome. Now, good evening and welcome. It's my pleasure to introduce Deacon Bob DeLuca, somebody that I've known for 15 years. Okay, let's just say that. Deacon Bob earned a bachelor's degree in theology from St. Anselm's College in New Hampshire, and now the rest is all history. He has gone on to spend the next several decades, but we won't say how many, forming others in the states of New Hampshire, New York, and we're blessed to have him here in the Diocese of St. Augustine. Along the way, he earned a master's degree from Boston College. In 2006, he was ordained to the permanent diaconate here for the Diocese of St. Augustine. He has served as the chairperson for the Clergy Formation Committee. He has taught on the ministry formation staff. He's been a pastoral associate in several of our parishes, and he continues to keep himself young by serving the young on the campus over there at Bishop Kenny High School. His interest in Padre Pio comes from his time discerning a vocation with the Capuchins. So we welcome him. Thank you so much for being here, Bob.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. Do I need to hold that or speak into that? Good evening, everybody. And thank you, Aaron, for the warm introduction. And I should give credit also to Monsignor Michael Hooley. I don't know if he's watching, but it was Monsignor Hooley who actually recruited me from Georgia to come and establish a campus ministry program at Bishop Kenny High School. And then once I arrived, he told me that there's an opening in the ministry formation program, Bob, and I think that you could teach that course. So that's how that all began. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about how it is that I'm here this evening. It has a little bit to do with Erin McGeever. She's instrumental in that, but also a story that she alluded to. And they tell the story about a Capuchin novice master and a young Capuchin novice. And Capuchins spend 1 year and a day, actually, in the study of the contemplative life and of the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and much of the time in prayer and work. And usually the young novice is assigned a duty. And this one young novice happened to be assigned to be the Father Guardian's secretary. Every friary has a guardian. The guardian is like an abbot in a monastery. Capuchins are friars, they're not monks. And so monks live in monasteries, friars live in friaries, and they actually live both a contemplative and an active life. So anyway, the young novice was appointed to be the guardian's secretary, which meant to keep the calendar of the guardian. And this guardian, he was invited all over the place. I mean, one night he'd be invited to talk to the Sisters of St. Joseph of Boston, and another night he'd be asked to go and work with the Engaged Encounter group, or maybe another time he was invited to the St. Joseph's Sodality or the men's group or whatever. And so the young novice thought to himself, gee, Father Guardian, do you just say yes to everything? Or is there anything that you don't like to talk about or that you don't know anything about? And the Father Guardian said to the young novice, well, my son, let me teach you the first lesson in the spiritual life. You look at my calendar, and if it is open, take that as a sign from God that I am meant to be there, and sign me up. Well, I received a telephone call from Deacon Peter Dang. Deacon, what are you doing on March 21st? And I looked at my calendar and I said, well, I really don't have anything to do. And he asked me, would you give a talk on Padre Pio? So my calendar was open and I'm here. And just by the way, those of you who dabble in ministry, I don't suggest that you live your life that way. Right? Not really a good precedent to follow. But I was that young novice, actually, because when I graduated from high school, In 1968, I read a little blurb on the front page of the Boston Globe, and it said, Capuchin stigmatist Padre Pio dies. And I thought, what is a stigmatist and what is a Capuchin? And I didn't want to die not knowing. And I went to my parish priest, who happened to have been a missionary on Guam, and he knew the provincial of the Capuchins very well. And although they had already formed their class of novices, he asked if he could send me to St. Anthony Friary in Hudson, New Hampshire, where I served first a year as a postulant, and then the following year as a novice. And after my novitiate year, I took simple vows, and those are renewable. Unlike marriage, you know, those vows are for life. Well, I think the religious, sometimes they have it right. They try it out first, you know. You can take it annually, and then you renew it for 3 years, and then you decide whether or not this is going to be a permanent lifestyle for you. And I had discerned that that was not the way of life that I was called to. So now you know. I will just like to say I am not a scholar. I am not an expert on Padre Pio, but I think I put together maybe a presentation that would hopefully inspire some of you who are here. By a show of hands, how many of you know anything at all about Padre Pio? Okay, so I could probably let you all go, and, you know. There's so much information about Padre Pio on the internet and in literature and in libraries, and I will just add this. The reason why Deacon Dang asked me if I was free in March, because you reminded me several months ago, I got a call from the DRE at St. Anastasia Parish on Anastasia Island. I mean, I had never been. I thought it was like a resort, you know. And she had asked Miss McGeever, we're having the relics of Padre Pio. Do you know anybody who could talk about Padre Pio? And she said, well, I think maybe Bob DeLuca. So the lady called me, and again, I looked at my calendar, and I was free, and I went. And as I was leaving the house that evening, my wife asked, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Anastasia Island. I mean, it sounded so exotic, you know, to present about Padre Pio. And she said, you think anybody will be there? I said, well, I have about 10 handouts prepared. I didn't prepare any tonight, by the way, but I'll send you the PowerPoint if you'd like. And when I arrived there were in excess of 150 people. I thought, well, I guess they don't have much to do on this resort island. And anyway, that's enough about that. But it shows the great, maybe, attraction and interest there is in him. So, he's widely known, Padre Pio, for his piety and for his charity, as well as for the gift of the Stigmata, the sacred Stigmata, which has never really ever been explained away. And so this evening it's my intention to introduce you to the Capuchin friar first, and then the priest, the stigmatist, and also the great mystic that he was. And our presentation this evening will be in 2 parts. Part 1, I'd like to take you through like a chronological approach to his life, just to kind of get the world view. And then maybe we'll have a little stand-up break, and then we'll kind of, what do you call it, when you break open some of those important moments of his life. I like to think and underscore Saint Pope John Paul II canonized Padre Pio in 2002. And this is what he said about Padre Pio during the homily of that canonization. Padre Pio was a generous dispenser of divine mercy, making himself available to all by welcoming them, by spiritual direction, and especially by the administration of the sacrament of penance. Pope John Paul says, I also had the privilege during my younger years of benefiting from his availability for penitence. Parentheses, there is this story that when St. John Paul was a young seminarian, he confessed to Padre Pio, who told him that you will be the Pope one day, and your reign will end in violence. Only to fast forward, and we all remember that afternoon when on the anniversary of Our Lady of Fatima, Ali Agda had attempted, the sharpshooter that he was, to kill the Pope, and Pope John Paul lived to say that it was the finger of the Blessed Mother that moved the bullet away from his heart, because Ali Agda said, I knew what I was doing. I don't know why that man is alive. I'm a trained sharpshooter, and I shot him to kill him. Anyway, that's a little parenthesis there. The ministry of the Confessional is one of the distinctive traits of his apostolate, attracting great crowds of the faithful to the monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo, and may this example encourage priests to carry out the apostolate with great joy. So what does that mean for us? I would say in the first place, I think you are here. This series is called All You Holy Men and Women. That's a beautiful name of the Lenten series, because guess what? We're not here this evening to be fascinated about Padre Pio. We should be here this evening because we want to become saints. That's why we're here. We're called to that sanctity of life. And of course, a very good step during Lent to answer that call to sanctity would be by making a good confession. So would you go to the next slide, please? 1887. Oh boy, I wish I had my little mouse. Okay, I do have to step this up. I wish I could train somebody to do this. Okay, so 1887, that's his birthplace. May 25th, Padre Pio was born. Francesco Forgione in Pietrelcina, Benevento, to Grazio Forgione and Maria Giuseppa Peppe Denunzio. Any Denunzios here? And the following day, they made no haste, they didn't waste any time, huh? The following day, little Francesco was baptized in the church of Santa Anna. And his diary says that he felt the call to religious life at the age of 5, when he promised then to consecrate himself forever to the Lord. And at that time, he had already undergone harsh penances. Imagine that. Usually, the 5-year-old, they impose harsh penances on their parents, but he had himself underwent harsh penances and defended himself from the attacks of the devil. And he is consoled, he writes, by ecstasy and celestial apparitions. I don't know what we would do with that today, But his parents, who were peasant farmers, had 2 other children who died as infants, and Pio had an older brother, Michael, and 3 younger sisters, Felicita, Pellegrina, and Grazia. And his parents supported his piety. His dad, actually, the story is told that his dad came to the United States to work. I think in Massachusetts, in the Springfield area, and sent money back to the family. So that, because you had to be educated to enter the Capuchins, and he wanted to be sure that he had money enough to get the proper education so that he one day could be a Capuchin. And he entered the Capuchins at the age of 15. Next, 1903. By the way, I'll have to tell a little joke. You know Pope Francis. You've heard of Pope Francis? Raise your hand, okay? So you know he is a Jesuit. Okay, that's the Pope's army. Okay, I don't care what anybody says, that's the Pope's army, the Jesuits. And he took the name, to everyone's surprise, Francis. And so they say when you cross a Jesuit with a Franciscan, you know what you get? A Capuchin. And this explains really why the Pope moved out of the papal palace and why he rubs his shoulders constantly with the poor and the outcast, and talks a lot about reaching out to those on the margins and the church being a field hospital, right, in our broken world. But that's all that spirituality is very Capuchin, okay? And it's a real blend between the Jesuits and the Franciscans. I just have to put in that little plug for the Holy Father. He takes the habit of a novice, and on the following January 2nd, takes the name of Fra Pio. Now the habit of the Capuchin is the brown tunic with a cord, you've all seen, and rosary beads. And from the day that you enter the community, you lose your razor. The beard is actually a part of the Capuchin habit. As distinct from other Franciscans. So exactly 1 year after he makes his temporary profession of vows, which he later definitively confirms at Sant Elias near Campobasso on January 27th, 1907. And several times he is forced to leave the convent and his studies because of his health. The doctors convince him to return to Pietrelcina to breathe the fresh air of his native town. Turn the page, turn the page. Okay, 1907. There's got to be a better way to do this. 1907. Brother Pio takes his final vows. Turn the page. 1910. Anybody around then? I don't think so. August 10th, 1910. In the chapel of the Cathedral of Benevento. Now he's 23 years old. And thanks to a special dispensation from the Holy See, he was ordained a priest by Archbishop Paolo Cinosi. And 4 days later, he offers his first solemn Mass. Remember, that's a pre-Vatican II, and the Mass was the Tridentine Mass, and his solemn Mass would have been the solemn high Mass with the priest, the deacon, and the subdeacon. 4 days later, he offers his Mass. In the memory book, he writes, "For you, Jesus, priest, holy, perfect victim." And those were not just words of Brother Pio. Several times, in fact, he offers himself to the Lord as a victim for poor sinners and a victim for poor souls, especially poor souls in purgatory. And that answer was not long in coming, offering himself as victim, because a few weeks later, there is the first appearance of the visible stigmata, especially in his hand. The soul remains very astonished. In his diary, he writes, and he prays to the Lord to withdraw such a visible phenomenon. And his prayer is answered. The piercings disappear, but not the acute pain that is felt, especially in some circumstances and on certain days. He would feel the intense agony and pain. And in the same period, the Lord grants the friar to share his crowning with thorns and his scourging. And he writes considerably about that. So we have August, he's ordained a priest. September, he had the invisible stigmata for about a year. And then August 14th of 1911, he has his first Mass and suffers from pains in his hands and feet. Next, please. 1915? Okay, It's too bad, Deacon Peter, that you couldn't move this for me. Okay, 1950. I know. World War II began in November of 1914, and you may or may not know that many Capuchins were drafted into the Italian army. So they were forced to leave the friary, and Pio served his, yes?
World War I, right?
World War I, yeah. Thank you. And Pio served his country in the 10th Company for the Italian Medical Corps, and he was known as Private Francesco Forgione. He began his military experience, and it was marked by 3 long periods of convalescence due to the exacerbation of his mysterious illness with a high fever. And the nightmare, finally, of having to wear the uniform ends in 1918, in March, when he is released from the because of double, we have a doctor in the house, bronchiolitis, and he granted a leave of absence and returned to his beloved town of Pietrelcina. Oh, I wish, and you know, is this 1916? Okay. So many Capuchins, so 1916, he's living in 4 different friaries. He was appointed to the monastery in Foggia, and then by July, during a period of suffocating heat, he was taken to the monastery of San Giovanni. Stays there for a week. He returns to San Giovanni Rotondo for some time and goes back again to Naples on national service, but his poor physical conditions finally make the doctors send him home on a special leave. Many Capuchins had been drafted due to the war, and so there were only 7 friars in the friary. He was one of them, and he spent his time teaching and praying alongside the townspeople. He convalesced in the convent there, and his spiritual director was convinced that his suffering was diabolical, caused by the evil one to keep him away from the cloister. And so in Foggia, he begins to suffer a lot from the heat. He's sent to the village of Gargano, where he finds refreshment from the heat, and he obtains permission to return provisionally. And on the following September 4th, he returns to Giovanni Rotondo, where he will remain for the rest of his entire life. Can you just, Tommy, should I be clicking on the bottom here or the top scrolling down? Could you just help me with this? Because after all, I'm going down my slide, I'm reading. Is that it? Okay, how do I go from slide to slide?
Where is your?
Okay.
Go to slideshow.
Okay, don't, because this is showing my notes, see? Okay, okay.
You should be able to go to slideshow and then click it, then it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your patience, all of you, very good. From this slide, from the current slide. But now it's not showing my notes. I don't have the note view. Okay. Present view, okay. Okay, where are we, 1918? 17? Okay, so 1917 he's called back on active duty, where he served in the medical corps. He took, again, a medical leave in November, and by March he's granted permanent discharge. And after a brief visit to his hometown, he returns to the friary, San Giovanni Rotondo, where he remains for the rest of his life. 1918. March 16th, he's returned to the monastery of Giovanni Rotondo for good. In August, through the work of a mysterious celestial being, Padre Pio's heart was pierced by a spear. leaving him with a wound that was to bleed for the rest of his life. And this phenomenon is known as transverberation. So that was internal, not external. And for a long time he wrote in his diary, "I have felt myself a need to suffer myself to the Lord as a victim for poor sinners and the poor souls in purgatory. This desire," he writes, "has been growing continually in my heart, so that it has now become what I would call a passion. It seems to me that Jesus wants this." And so shortly after the stigmata appeared on his body on Friday, September 20th, 1918, while making his thanksgiving after Holy Mass in the chapel, these wounds would become permanent and remain on his body for 50 years. And so this became sort of like a spectacle, right? Because the friars saw them. They saw that they were scabbing, they were bleeding. They would drop sometimes a scab onto the floor, and the friars would have to pick it up. And so countless doctors were called in to examine him, examine his wounds, and there was no clear explanation. He never had a fever nor drops in blood pressure. Still, they bled for 50 years. There is a story of one musician who went to the doctor. I think he was saying to the doctor, "I'm going to go see Padre Pio." And the doctor says, "Oh, that man's a fraud, you know? The stigmata, that's just, he thinks too much about Jesus. He just caused those, you know, in his mind, just a result of his hallucinating." So the artist said, "Well, I'm going to go see him anyway." So he goes to see Padre Pio, and he tells Padre Pio the story that the doctor said, "Oh, you're just imagining all of this." And he said, "Well, you go home and ask the doctor if he's been thinking a lot about being an ox." He didn't use the word ox, you know, because, yeah, because he's become one. Anyway, initially Pio felt great humiliation at the wounds on his body. The visible stigmata brought him great pain, but he welcomed the suffering for the good of humankind, and millions of pilgrims visited him each year, wishing to see some of the miraculous manifestations. So the first recorded stigmatist. Now, the first, we know in the epistles, some biblical scholars would say St. Paul had the stigmata because he refers to, "Don't be so hard on me, I have the marks of Christ on my body." Although that is, not necessarily a matter of doctrine or dogma, but it is speculated that this may be. St. Francis himself is the first recorded stigmatist. St. Francis, remember, because he lived his life so closely in imitation of Christ, at his death he was rewarded with the imprint, like the imprimatur, right? The good housekeeping seal of approval. He received the stigmata at his death. Pio, on the other hand, he is the first recorded priest stigmatist. But interestingly, at the moment of Pio's death, the wounds disappear. It's just a little, so Francis, okay, next. So, 1923? No? Okay. Now you can imagine what begins to happen. You know, the church always has to take a cautiously suspicious approach. You know, we've seen that even in a lifetime, you know. The Blessed Mother appears in a toaster, on a piece of toast, on somebody's window, you know. And I'm not really, making light of that, but, usually the church's stance to a Marian apparition is, well, we'll wait and see. We're not really sure that this is really what is happening. And so there was a lot of curiosity. There were hundreds of thousands of pilgrims who would go just to get a look at him, to see him, maybe to be blessed by him, to touch him. And there were those who really thought, well, the guy he's nuts, There's this self-inflicted or whatever. So Rome initially imposed very severe sanctions on him to reduce his publicity. He was not allowed, he was forbade to say Mass in public. He was forbade to bless people. He was forbade to answer letters or to show anybody the stigmata. And authorities decided then to relocate him to another monastery in North Italy. And the local people, remember they're Italian, they revolt and they threaten a riot. Actually, they're going to really break into the friary and take Padre Pio as their own and preserve him from having to leave them. And the Vatican decided to leave him where he was. Next. Rome, I said that, 11, 12. The people, he was a great confessor. The people resented that, and so they went to his defense, and it's a beautiful story. By 1931, the tide begins to turn, and Pius XI ordered a reversal of the ban on public celebration of Mass. Pius XI says, "I have not been badly disposed toward Padre Pio, but I have been badly informed by others about Padre Pio." And so in 1934, the friar was allowed to say public Mass and hear confessions. This is where I might insert a story. And I want to be sure to have it right. But so the Pope calls the inquisitors, the cardinal inquisitors from the Holy Office, hello. Okay, I keep forgetting. And they decide to really come to make a decision about Padre Pio. The door to the meeting room opened. So you picture the Pope is sitting in there, the cardinal inquisitors are sitting in there. Most of them are against Padre Pio. And the attendees, the door opens and a young Capuchin friar enters the door, Vatican City. The attendees were bewildered and shocked, since not only was he uninvited, but the Swiss guards were supposedly protecting the entranceway. The monk had his hands hidden in the sleeves of his habit, and he seemed to walk with a slight limp. Before anyone could stop or interrogate him, he came directly towards the Pope. When he reached the Holy Father, he knelt before him and kissed his feet. And then he pronounced these words, "Your Holiness, for the good of the Church, do not permit this to occur." Kissing once again the feet of the pontiff, he asked for his blessing, arose, and left the room. What just happened? Just as soon as he departed, all the cardinals, recovering from their amazement, became very agitated. Some of them exited the room to demand from the guards why they had let this monk enter, in spite of the strict prohibitions against visitors. The surprised guards marveled at this and said that they had not even seen any friar. The cardinals re-entered the room, and the Holy Father, having intuited what must have occurred, immediately suspended the meeting. He commended them not to speak about the incident. However, with great solicitude, he ordered Cardinal Silli to travel to San Giovanni Rotondo to investigate. The cardinal was to interrogate the father guardian of the convent as to where Padre Pio was on that day and time and what he was doing. And when the cardinal arrived to the friary to see the guardian took him into the chapel and pointed to where Padre Pio was and had been. This is where Padre Pio was yesterday. He never left that spot. So it was an experience of bilocation that turned the mind of the Holy Father and some of the cardinals to lift the ban that they had placed on Padre Pio, restricting his whereabouts. He was then, in 1933, given honorary permission to preach. Now, in those days, preaching didn't come automatically with ordination. you had to get a special license, permission to preach. I remember as a child, one of our priests never preached, and now I know why, because he never had actually the faculties to preach. He was given an honorary permission to preach despite never having taken the exam for the preaching license. And Pius XII, in 1939, he began encouraging devotees to visit Padre Pio. And in the mid-60s, Pope Paul VI dismissed all of the accusations against Padre Pio. Next slide. Those are his vestments that he would wear in his private masses, which sometimes his mass could take several hours because he was experiencing the agony of the Lord. And in 1940, movement started on Padre Pio's great earthly undertaking, namely the House of Relief for Suffering. And that's a picture of the house. I want to get moving here. Okay, so here in 1968, September 22nd. Am I going too fast for anybody? No. Okay. Too slow? No. Okay. Padre Pio says Mass at 5 o'clock in the morning, as usual. And this was to be his last celebration of the Eucharist. At 2:30 in the morning the next day, September 23rd, he dies. He died of a heart attack at Our Lady of Grace Friary. And many of the friars there then were eager and willing to begin his process of canonization. His health worsened in 1966, 2 years earlier, and he was limited to, confined to a wheelchair, and he had obtained special permission to offer Mass seated in the wheelchair. And 5 a.m., he celebrates his last Mass, during which he nearly faints due to fatigue that came about as a collapse. He collapsed during the Mass. And he was taken into the sacristy by a couple of friars, and it is recorded that he prayed, "My children, my children." Later, he gave his final blessing to the crowd, which was his last public appearance. At 2:30 in the morning the next day, he died, repeating, "Jesus, Mary." And of course, you know, many pictures that you see of Padre Pio, he always had in his hands the rosary, okay? And during the inspection of the body and the just expired Capuchin, the stigmata disappeared without a trace. Why? They're no longer needed. His mission as the priest victim is over. And so that is the death of Padre Pio. And we'd like to maybe, 1983, the process of canonization is opened. Next slide there, okay? And we can move through this because we want to get into some stories. 1987, recall, Pope John Paul, now St. John Paul II, made a pilgrimage, and he prayed at Padre Pio's tomb. And of course, you know, the other pilgrimage Pope John Paul made was to go to Our Lady of Fatima and place the bullet that was taken from his chest and put it in the crown of Our Lady. And today, I guess, I'm not here to talk about this, but it could be argued that we are living right now in the unfolding of the Marian prophecies at Fatima. So 2/12/1990, the beatification process, Chancellor of the cause for canonization, was complete. Next. I really wish I had. 1997, he acquires the title Venerable due to his heroic virtues in the presence of John Paul II. Next, and 1999, in St. Peter's Square, he is proclaimed the Venerable Padre Pio Blessed. And in 2002, next, do I have to keep saying next? Are you doing that? Wonderful, wonderful. He's officially canonized by Pope John Paul II, and he is proclaimed to be a saint. Now, there is one word, really, and we haven't even talked now about his gifts. That'll come next. But there's one word, really, that describes Padre Pio's life, and that is prayer. The friar was known to be constantly in prayer, but he also used his prayer to help others. So he started prayer groups, not only in the friary, but all around Italy and throughout Europe, and today they are all over the world, Padre Pio prayer groups. You can actually even belong, I think, virtually, now with the internet. He used prayer for therapy and healing, literally bringing thousands of people back to the Catholic faith. John Paul said, prayer and charity is the most concrete synthesis of Padre Pio's teaching. Which brings me to another story. And then we'll have our break to go into part 2. So the story, you might be wondering, I think you have to have a miracle to be proclaimed a saint. What was the miracle that Padre Pio performed? This is just a brief, right? You can find all this stuff yourself. I mean, this is not rocket science, right? Matteo Pio Colella was 7 years old when he contracted a deadly disease. Doctors believed there was no hope for the boy, but he made a full recovery. His cure was the miracle that paved the way for the canonization of Padre Pio by John Paul II in June of 2002. This is the abbreviated version, by the way. There are pages of documentation that you can read about this. Colella, now 27, well, that was a few years ago, gave an exclusive interview on the occasion of the pre-release of the film made about Padre Pio, which is a documentary. He said, "I wasn't feeling well," he recalled. "I told my mother that I didn't want to go to school, but she made me go because at that time, I didn't like school. The same night when my mother came to say goodnight, I didn't recognize her, and they immediately took me to the hospital." On January 20th, 2000, Colella was diagnosed with acute fulminant meningitis caused by bacteria. When did Padre Pio die? 1968, okay? The disease had affected his kidneys, his respiratory system, and blood clotting. He was immediately admitted to the hospital founded by Padre Pio, Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, the home for the relief of suffering. I think my grandmother would be proud of me. Located in San Giovanni Rotondo, where the Saints Monastery is. The following day, Colella went into a coma. His health deteriorated drastically. Doctors considered him a lost cause, thinking he would die within a few hours. When Colella was in this critical condition, his mother, Maria Lucia, went to pray over the tomb of Padre Pio to ask for her son's healing. During the coma, Colella recounted, "I saw Padre Pio in a dream on my right, and 3 angels on the left, one with golden wings, one with a white tunic, and the 2 others with white wings and a red tunic. Padre Pio on my right told me, 'Don't worry, because I would soon be cured.' In fact, my cure was like the resurrection of Lazarus." And that's exactly what happened. The doctors considered Colella to be clinically dead, but he came back to life. The young man is grateful to Padre Pio for his intercession. He said he considers the saint to be like a grandfather in whom he can confide. "I've always thought that I have received an enormous grace for which I must be thankful. When I talk to someone who doesn't believe, I tell them, I'm here. For science, it's inexplicable, but there is another explanation that we cannot understand," says the young man. Okay, going to stop there. We're going to do part 2. You need a bathroom break? Stand up. Okay, this is what we do now. Everybody stands up. Do like this. Okay, hands over your head. Okay, very good. Okay, okay, okay. On the side, stretch, 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 stretch. Okay, okay. Turn around, turn around. Everybody turn in that direction. Okay. So put your hands on the shoulders of the person in front of you. Okay. Okay, and give a little squeeze, okay? Okay, return the favor. Thank you, very good. We could, do we have a time? Yeah. Tell me, do you want a break? 5 minutes, drink, get a water, coffee, something? Come back. We're going to start right away. Because we only hit the tip of the iceberg. Now you have to help me with this, okay? Because when I see...
Yeah, so is this a touchscreen or not?
No, I don't think so.
So pull your presentation up.
Okay.
I know that he would be in the confessional 15 hours a day.
Oh, yes, yes.
And he was a person that, like you say, he could read people's confessions, knew them.
Yes,
before they
yes.
went there.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he did not put up with people in the confessional line for any
Yes,
occasion.
yes.
On many occasions, not all, but many.
Very good, very good,
Yeah.
very good. Oh, yeah.
Like if he knew they were lying
Yeah.
and they were persisting in their lies,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
out of the confessional.
But interesting enough, they all came back,
Oh, they all came back and confessed.
or many of them did.
I got something.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, please.
Back in August, my husband was admitted for emergency appendicitis.
Right.
And they were gonna do surgery that morning. And, the doctor called me and says it's more involved. He said, my husband's got colon cancer. And, a friend of mine that says, I called on my sisters to pray for me. And my, friend told me, says, babe, we need to start praying Father Pio's healing prayer right away. And we start praying Father Healer, and we haven't stopped. And when he went to go get checked at the cancer center, they found no cancer. So
We're going to end with that healing prayer. Beautiful.
it is a beautiful prayer.
Okay, so continuing the presentation on St. Padre Pio, a Capuchin friar, priest, mystic, healer, stigmatist. First of all, we want to kind of set things straight. I don't think it's necessary for this group, but saints, right? The role of saints in Catholicism. And Catholics, number one, I think you know that we don't worship saints, okay? And we don't worship statues, we don't worship pictures, okay? But we honor the people they signify. It's an important distinction. And those who die in Christ are alive and blessed. And so praying to them is not a form of sorcery, because relationships do not end in death. There's a very thin veil that separates this life from the next. And so,
Have them intercede for us.
and we have them intercede for us. But it's not worship. You know, very often people are confused. You Catholics, you worship saints, you worship statues. No, we don't. They are our friends. And a little story that I'd like to share about that is when I graduated from college in 1974, the only job I could get with a degree in, this is true, religion, was a bartender. So I was a bartender on Cape Cod, and I had an apartment, and upstairs from me lived two, I guess you would say, politically correct, mentally handicapped women. And so we used to meet sometimes down at the trash can, and I got, what's your name? I'm Bob. Okay. Where are you going today, Bob? Well, I'm going to the mall. The mall? What's a mall? You've never been to a mall? So I talked him to the mall. And within 10 minutes, I lost them. And I found them, they were on the escalator. They were going up the escalator, down the escalator, up the escalator, down the... They had never been on an escalator. And a custom I always had, and then they want to go every Saturday, you know. Oh, take us to the mall whenever you're going to the mall again. So one was Jewish. I'd go trying to find a parking space. I'd start, Anthony, find me a place. Anthony, find me a place. Sure enough, somebody backs out. We had a place. I mean, it worked like a charm. Still does, actually. So one day the father comes from New York. He said, what do you want to do, girls? We want to go to the mall. You want to go to the mall? Yeah, we want to go to the mall. Bob takes us to the mall. We go to the mall. Okay. So they start looking for a parking space, and the girl says, Anthony, find me a place. Anthony, find me a place. Anthony, find me a place. Who the hell is Anthony? The guy says, I don't know. It's a friend of Bob's, you know? I like to tell that story because, you know, the saints were ordinary human beings, right? Now, Pio is extraordinary in a way, but who lived very virtuous lives and overcame great challenges and obstacles like everyone in this room, right? So Catholics do not worship saints. We worship God, and we imitate God by honoring the saints. We honor them. Next slide. Okay, here's a popular picture of Padre Pio, and the threefold benefit of proper veneration of the saints is we ask them for intercession and supplication. We are inspired by their example, and we honor them as God does. Next, this is Jose Maria Escriva. Oh, I don't have to read it here because it's there. He says, there is not a single soul in whom Christ is not interested. Each soul has cost him the price of his blood. And I want to subliminally tell you that Christ is as much interested in each and every one of you becoming saints as he was in Padre Pio becoming a saint, right? I mean, this is the call, we call it the call to universal holiness, really. So Pope Francis, I love his tweets, you know. I really do love Pope Francis' tweets. He tweeted, the saints were not superhuman, they were people who loved God in their hearts and who shared this joy with others, okay? Again, that's our call, you and me, and the saints really give witness to that, as did Padre Pio. Pope Francis, again, oh, okay. Again, I think to be saints is not a privilege for the few, but a vocation for everyone. Okay? I mean, again, we're not sitting here thinking, oh, I mean, actually, I'm going to confess, there was a time in my life, you know, I wanted to be, in my immaturity, I wanted to be like Padre Pio, you know. I think when I was a novice, oh, please, could I wake up to have the stigmata, you know. But, I mean, this is not... It's not a privilege for the few, but it's a vocation for everyone. And God, you don't have to go looking for the way to become a saint, because those ways are given to you in your ordinary life, right? It's by doing ordinary things in an extraordinary way. That is the path to holiness that I want to emphasize, okay? So holiness, it does not make you less human. Since it is an encounter between your weakness and the power of God's grace. For in the words of Leon Bloy, when all is said and done, the only great tragedy in life is not to become a saint. It's an interesting story of Leon Bloy. I think he was on the verge of suicide and despair when he encountered a priest who told him, you know, to go to his room and pray. Pray? What do you mean pray? And the only real tragedy in life is not to become a saint. So I hope you leave tonight wanting to become a saint. Holiness is not reserved for a small number of exceptional persons. It is for everyone. It is the Lord who brings us to holiness when we are willing to collaborate in the salvation of the world for the glory of God despite our sin and our sometimes rebellious temperament. And I love this quotation of Padre Pio because this is 10 days before he died. And when you hear these words and think about that he was actually writing this to you, okay? I offer you my prayers and daily sufferings as a small but sincere contribution on the part of the least of your sons. I pray that God may lead you, John, Mary, Susan, Michael, Timothy, Aaron, right? That God may lead you with his grace to follow the straight and painful way in defense of eternal truth, which does not change with the passing of years. Okay, Padre Pio's spiritual gifts. Maybe we should have just started with that, but we got to have a little build-up. So, Padre Pio's spiritual gifts are the odor of sanctity, scrutinizing consciences, the visible wounds, bilocation, confessor of souls, miracles, spiritual maxims, and the great mission, which he calls. The odor of sanctity is the scent of Padre Pio. So a few saints, I mean, if you're smelling any roses, you know, it's not me. I'm just saying. A few saints are said to have emitted a strong odor of sanctity that lasted for days immediately upon their death, notably Teresa of Avila, known for her mystical religious writings, and Teresa Lisieux, who stressed simplicity of life and faith. They were said to fill their respective convents with the scent of roses at the moment of death. The odor of sanctity is also said to characterize the wounds of saints, particularly the stigmata, spontaneously forming wounds that mirror those of Christ during the crucifixion. Padre Pio, an Italian priest and saint, had the stigmata that lasted for 50 years and allegedly, according to his confreres who lived with him, smelled of roses. Yes?
I read, a
Yes?
friend of mine gave me a book about Padre Pio, something about he had the gift of perfume, and I didn't know what that meant.
That's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, the odor of sanctity, you know. Which we'll get to later, but when they exhumed his body 50 years later, there was no stench. There still was this odor of the gift of perfume of roses. Scrutinizing consciences. Confession is the soul's bath. Even a clean and unoccupied room gathers dust. Return after a week and you'll see that it needs dusting again, St. Padre Pio. So many, 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 many stories that go something like this. Okay, the little girl who tells the mother, "Mommy, we're going to go, so and so. Oh, where are you going to? I don't want you to go to see that priest. You stay away from him. Oh no, we're not going to go see that priest, Padre Pio." Okay, so she goes to confession. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I stole the banana. I ate the skin. These are my sins, Father." And she tells the sins. "Oh, do you want to tell me anything else?" "No." "You want to tell you didn't confess? You lied to your mother." "Because you told her that you weren't going to come to see me, and you did." So this is an example of that he would have the ability to actually to read souls and to tell people, and sometimes he was not very polite about it, I guess, or nice about it. He could chase people away. "Come back when you're going to tell me the truth," He would reveal to them sins sometimes that they forgot to confess. Okay, so the reader of souls, scrutinizing consciences. But in the Pope's homily at his, canonization, revealed that although he drove many sinners away because of his harshness, they all seemed to return to experience his mercy, and he could be very, very merciful. Right. The gift of the sacred stigmata. Of course, he's the most famous for being the stigmatist, right? The accounts of those who stayed with Pio until his final hours stated the stigmata had completely disappeared and left only a scar, only a red mark, as if drawn by a red pencil, one of the friars wrote, remained on his side, but it too disappeared. Needless to say, many people questioned the reality of those wounds of his. Oh, here's the story of the Italian actor and singer, comedian Carlo Campanini told his doctor that he was going to see Padre Pio. He was well known throughout Europe, right? The skeptical doctor replied, "Padre Pio got the stigmata because he thought too much about the wound of Christ." So when Campanini saw Padre Pio the next day, he shared the physician's assessment, and Pio told him, "When you see that doctor, tell him to think intensely about being an ox, Let's see if he grows horns." Good old-fashioned Italian peasant wisdom, humor, and common sense. Okay. On that note, Galatians 6 talks about St. Paul admonishes, "Henceforth let no man trouble me. Why? I bear on my body the marks of Jesus." I mentioned that earlier. That has led not few commentators to conclude that perhaps Paul is the first stigmatist in Christian history, although St. Francis is the first recorded case. Now, there have been, you may know or not, many others throughout history. For example, Rita of Cascia, Anne Catherine Emmerich, Marie of the Incarnation, Teresa Neumann, Catherine de' Ricci, and Catherine of Siena. So this is not something that has been limited only to men, but many women. In fact, I think there are some women today who allegedly have the stigmata. These stigmatists have in common an intense devotion to the Passion of Christ, giving rise to compassion, which means literally suffering with others, right? For our suffering Lord. And that spiritual or psychological compassion then manifests itself physically. Those individuals stand forth as holy witnesses to what should be the response of each of us if we are truly aware of the price of our redemption. So, gazing at the cross of our Savior should cause us to marvel at the depth of human depravity and the heights of diving love, right? So love first calls us to be empathetic, right? And that shouldn't bring about sympathy, right? Because we don't want to just have sympathy on those who are suffering, but it should yield compassion. Compassio, suffering with. So it's really kind of endemic in the call to sanctity for all of us, is to suffer with others, to offer our sufferings for others, and also to help others to carry their suffering. So those would go back there. You see, those are just Pio as a young man, and that's you can get close-ups on the internet. Okay, very good. The phenomenon. Bilocation. I love this one here. Okay, now it's the simultaneous presence of the same person in two different places. Through the supernatural gift of bilocation, Pio was able to be in different places at the same time. He was able to be present and speak, listen, and live in two or more different events all at once. Phenomenal, right? Don't you wish sometimes that you had that ability? In 1921, he was questioned about this under oath by Bishop Rossi, and this is what Pio said. It did happen to me to be in the presence of this or that person, in this or that place. I do not know if my mind was transported there, or what I saw was some sort of representation of the same person or place. I do not know if I was there with my body or without it. For example, one night I found myself at the bedside of a sick woman, Maria Massa, in San Giovanni Rotondo. I was in the convent. I think I was praying. I didn't know her personally. She had been recommended to me. The first case of his bilocation, he was 17 years old, a seminarian. And he found himself in North Italy in a home where a woman was pregnant and the husband was dying. And he did not want anything to do with the church or the sacrament. And I guess he died. Good, right? And then the baby was born, he baptized the baby. The baby he baptized, 23 years later, is in the Vatican, and she decides she wants to go to confession. And she attempts to go to confession, and this, you know, they have like toll booths there, right? You can have French, Spanish, Mexican, German, Italian, anything you want. Just walk right up. And the Swiss guards wouldn't let her in. They said, confession, it's all over. And she saw this little Franciscan priest says, come, come, I'll hear your confession. And she went to confession, and when she's leaving, the Swiss guard says, I thought I told you there was no confession and to stay out of there. She said, oh, there was a little Franciscan friar there with a beard, and he heard my confession, and blah, 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 blah. Oh, there's no Franciscan friar here today. Well, she had heard about Padre Pio, and she went to visit him to see, you know, about this man. And when she approached him, he said, there you are. I've been waiting for you. I was at your house when your father died and you were born. I baptized you. and I've been waiting all these years to hear your confession. Beautiful story. By location, simultaneous presence. All'Italia, it must be true, right? You have to stay with Catholic sources, number one. And there's a lot, I don't even want to dignify them by mentioning it. There's a lot of not so nice stuff about Padre Pio that you can find on the internet too. It's rubbish, okay? So I'm on tape, so I can't say what I want to say. But. In the midst of World War II, Italy was invaded by Nazi Germany. Allied forces made many attempts to liberate the country. According to various accounts, intelligence reported a cache of German munitions near San Giovanni Rotondo, the town in which stood the friary of St. Padre Pio. However, at the beginning of the war, Padre Pio reassured the people no bomb will touch their small city. True to his word, Padre Pio reportedly went out of his way to make this happen. According to Frank Riga in his book Padre Pio in America, none of the Allied planes sent to bomb San Giovanni Rotondo area were able to complete their mission successfully. There were often mysterious malfunctions, causing the bombs to drop harmlessly in the fields, or mechanical failures which caused the planes to veer off course. An American pilot was just about to bomb the city when suddenly, he's in the air. Suddenly, the pilot saw in front of his plane the image of a monk in the sky, gesturing with his arms and hands for the plane to turn back. The shocked pilot did just that and jettisoned his bombs elsewhere. When he returned to the base and told his story, his commanding officer decided it was best to put this pilot in a hospital under observation for mission fatigue. The pilot couldn't get the image from his mind, and after the war, he made inquiries to find this monk. He eventually made the journey to San Giovanni Rotondo and recognized the flying monk as Padre Pio. While the accounts might appear to be factitious tales, what is true is that San Giovanni Rotondo was spared during World War II, and multiple pilots reported seeing a flying monk in the sky over the spot where they were ordered to unload bombs. And many of those American soldiers brought those stories home. And these stories are true. It further attests to the remarkable sanctity of Padre Pio and how he was given extraordinary graces during life. He was united to God so intimately that he could be in two places at once, extending himself to another location because of his deep relationship with God. God, after all, who exists outside of space and outside of time. Padre Pio certainly did not do any of these amazing feats from his own power, but through the infinite power of God. Just as Jesus said to his apostles, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. One story that I read was that this soldier asked to confess he was not Catholic. And the priest, Padre Pio, told him, you're going to be fine, You'll have to go home to the United States, become a Catholic, and you're going to be a Capuchin priest. And that's exactly what happened. The Protestant soldier went home, became a Catholic. He didn't even know what a Capuchin was, became a Capuchin priest. By location. So there's the stories. Confessor of souls. Next, confession is the soul's bath. Even a clean and unoccupied room gathers dust. Return after a week and you'll see that it needs dusting again. So he manifested the ability to read minds, to look far into the future, a mystical gift for sure. Padre Pio was also known for, and these occurrences have touched the lives of many. There have been many, many, many documented, recorded stories about, as you alluded to earlier, Padre Pio's time in the confessional. Here's some statistics. Padre Pio spent most of his day hearing confessions. From 1918 to 1923, he heard confessions 15 to 19 hours a day. During the 40s and 50s, about 8 hours a day. In 1962, he heard 83,000 women's confessions and 19,000 men registered. They had to register at the friary. Maybe they were keeping records, for his canonization one day. An average of about 237 per day. And in 1967, he heard 15,000 women and 10,000 men, an average of 70 people a day. And I have a feeling these were not very short confessions, right? Because he had a way of pulling it out of you. People would come to him from all over the world. He heard the confessions in the old church even after the new one was built. Turn the page. Miracles. A person has to conduct miracles. We mentioned the miracle earlier that won him his canonization. They're closely reviewed by the church to establish their divine origin. So, did Padre Pio perform miracles? As it turns out, he had been performing miracles his entire life. As a child, the saint spent his time speaking with Jesus, the angels, the Virgin Mary, all of who appeared to him in regular visions. And he later said that as a child, he assumed that this was normal. It wasn't until later that he realized not everyone could hold conversation with Jesus on a daily basis. Stories of miracles followed Pio everywhere. Those who prayed with him spoke of him making prophecies, healing the sick, levitating. Monks of the monastery went even further, saying that Padre Pio had frequently performed miracles of bilocation. His schedule was so full that being in one place simply wasn't enough for him. The one story I love is, I think it was in South America, the young boy had cancer, and the doctor told the parents, you better really get ready. He's not going to live. Go call the undertaker or whatever it is that you're going to do. And so the next day the family came back, and the young boy was sitting up in bed. He wanted to eat. And they called the doctor. The doctor said, I cannot understand this. He's fine. He's cured. And what happened? He said, well, this little priest came to visit me, stood at the foot of the bed. He told me that everything was going to be fine. And, oh, really? What did he look like? And you know how they have these artists that, this guy, maybe they give a portrait of a criminal or something. Who do you think? And so this picture is Padre Pio. He said, oh, but he never left his monastery in Pietrelcina. There are copious stories like that. So next, spiritual maxims. So this is also a gift of his, that some of these sayings these are beautiful. You think I spend time doing that? No, you find it on the internet. Right click, copy, paste, right? But they're there. Make some. I'm going to start a business. I'm going to start making these, put them on your refrigerator, right? Don't spend your energies on things that generate worry, anxiety, and anguish. Only one thing is necessary. Lift up your spirit and love God, St. Padre Pio. The spiritual maxims, his spiritual sayings, quotes, are considered really one of his gifts because they live on forever. Next, the most beautiful act of faith is the one made in darkness, in sacrifice, and with extreme effort. Chew on that a little bit. And the great mission. Click. And the promise, by the way, that And I actually met a lady in Anastasia, now I can't remember her name, but she referred to this. His promise, once I take a soul on, I also take their entire family as my spiritual children. And I mean, I have to take her at face value, but she shared with me how her father had devotion to Padre Pio. She was an unbeliever herself. She started to have devotion to Padre Pio. Her family was a mess with all kinds of addiction, you name it. And she claims that the healing of her family from addiction, drugs, alcohol, sex, was all she attributes to Padre Pio's intercession, and so he is her adopted grandfather, right? I mean, so he prayed unceasingly. The great mission is that don't allow, another one. Don't allow any sadness to dwell in your soul, for sadness prevents the Holy Spirit from acting freely. But how often we do dwell on in our, poor me, why me, what about me, how come me, right? When every day we have a chance to wake up and say, am I going to be mad today? Or am I going to be sad today? Or am I going to be glad today? And so truly this man of great suffering and prayer reminds us over and over and over again of God's mercy and his call. I mean, this Pope Francis, he's always inviting us to the joy of the gospel. And in many ways, this is what Padre Pio did, right? Click. If you should fail, be humble. Make a resolution to be submissive to God's will. And then get up and carry on. Every man needs to really put that on the refrigerator. I was at a wedding. I met this man. I was having. I says, "Oh, how long have you been married?" He says, 65 years. I said, 65 years. Wow. What can I tell the bride and groom? What's your secret? He said 2 words. Yes, dear. Okay. Pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful and will hear your prayer, right? Sometimes in the midst of our pain and suffering, it's really hard to imagine that. But he reminds us always of hope. You see the hope, message of hope and mercy and joy. Click. Okay, that's his body. Exhumed 50 years later. After my death, he says, I will do more. My real mission will begin after my death, he often said. So a powerful intercessor amongst the communion of saints, Padre Pio Pietrelcina, now hears our prayers as well. May we learn from his hopeful example, staying faithful in prayer amidst our sufferings and healings. Well, I don't know where that went, but when they exhumed him, is a better way to talk about it. When they exhumed him, this is from Nazareno Gabrielli. I wish I was Italian, He is the expert for the Vicariate of Rome for the conservation of saints. He's a biochemist at the service of the Holy See. Please note, he's a person of authority, right? So in addition to working with St. Pio's body, he worked with the remains of St. Clare of Assisi, whose body is incorrupt, with St. John the 23rd, St. Pius the 9th, and Pius the 10th. Good enough, don't you think? Yeah. Okay. Gabrielli explained that, because people, and this may surprise some, but when opening Padre Pio's coffin, these conditions were verified. And this was brought for the Year of Mercy. Pope Francis, right, brought Padre Pio's body to the Vatican for people to come and venerate and open wide the doors of mercy. The skin on his face still existed. There were still ears and lips. There was a beard and mustache. There were no more eyes or nose. The head, trunk, and pelvis were in good condition. The lower limbs were very deteriorated. What almost surprised all members of the commission during the body examination was the absolute absence of bad odors. In fact, the presence of the odor of sanctity. According to the diocesan bishop who accompanied the exhumation, the upper part of the skull was partially skeletal, the chin was perfect, the rest of the body was well preserved, and in the photo below, you can see that the hands on Padre Pio's body were quite deteriorated. The question is, did the body receive any treatment after exhumation? Yes. Padre Pio's body received chemical treatment to remain preserved after exhumation. Gabrielli revealed that a solution with a high concentration of formalin and alcohol was applied. The procedure was complete with creosote, benzoic acid, and turpentine essence. The body was wrapped with bands soaked in an embalming chemical solution, except the head. And then it was placed on a mattress filled with silica gel to absorb moisture. Finally, it is placed inside a transparent coffin with special technology. The air inside is replaced with nitrogen, which prevents any oxidative process, inhibits the development of bacterial microflora and aerobic fungi.
Deacon, I know you said it, but how many years after?
50 was 50, yeah. So, look, I hope I look like that when I'm like sleeping. So, and then I think we want to end with a Padre Pio healing prayer, right? Which is the next slide. I know we have just touched the surface on everything, but I wanted to give you an outline of his life, right? And then maybe it piques your curiosity. You can go back and want to read more, you know. Stick with the Catholic sites and stay away from the others. But yes, yes. Oh, my dear Lord. Oh, the saints come marching in. Oh, when the saints come marching in, I want to be in that number. Oh, when the saints come marching in. Okay, so now a moment of prayer. So we're going to bring, this is Father Padre Pio's healing prayer, which maybe you could, maybe let's do us all a favor, you know. Oh, hey, just a minute. Oh. I think it really, we need to give pause to the world, and especially as we prepare for the consecration of Russia and Ukraine on Friday to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And, ooh, this is scary. Let's pray. Let's pray this healing prayer, especially for the much needed healing in the world, especially in Russia and the Ukraine, and for all of us, all of our needs and intentions. Thank you.
The most powerful healing prayer by St. Padre Pio. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, I thank you for loving me. I thank you for sending your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, to the world, to save and to set me free. I trust in your power and grace that sustain and restore me. Loving Father, touch me now with your healing hands, for I believe that your will is for me to be well, in mind, body, soul, and spirit. Cover me with the most precious blood of your Son, our Lord.
blessed to be in San Giovanni on a pilgrimage, and it was really incredible. It was, and the facilities that they had built after his death, of course, you know, he took both the poverty and you know, but I mean, it's a beautiful outdoor facility, an indoor chapel, and his body's entombed there, and it's, if you ever get a chance, go, it's incredible.
You mentioned how people who are not Catholics think we pray to statues or pictures or whatever. And I said to someone who was talking about how Catholics pray to statues, I said, don't you ever ask your friends to pray for you? I said, my grandmother died, but to me, she's a saint. I asked my grandmother to pray for me. And so that's how I try to explain it to them.
Thank you for sharing that, for sure. I don't think a day passes by when somebody doesn't ask, you know, I'm sure any of us, my dad lost his job, can you pray for my dad? Or my dog died, or, you know, whatever. I mean, we're always asked to pray for others and to see for others. So the story about, you know, the St. Anthony and the friend of Bob's, right? The saints are our friends, and that we should never hesitate to turn to them to ask for their intercession and the call to sanctity for all of us, right? That's how we should be to each other. Any other takeaways? Yes.
Bob, thank you very much. It was a great walk with holiness. It occurs to me that most of the people who are suppressed because of intellectual disagreements, thinking of DeLuca and Reiner, theologians of that type. But the amazing thing is that after the experience with St. Bernadette, for example, 50, 60 years later, they suppress another man who is obviously on the path of holiness. I don't know. Do you have an opinion why these things happen?
I mean, the only opinion I have is you know, the church is cautiously suspicious and not, you know, hesitates to maybe make an error on the side of maybe something that isn't real. No, but then again, I guess Deacon Jack, you remind me of the Lord who said that don't be surprised when the world hates you, despises you because they despised me first. I think maybe, as I think out loud, the dynamic is that the closer you are on the path to holiness and goodness, the greater rejection and suffering you'll receive from the world. That's kind of the dynamic there, you know. And it happens in our families, where even family members maybe, you know, reject us or don't understand us, or I think that's what I'm trying to say. I think that is that dynamic. It's a pull. It's a tension. It's a spiritual tension of I don't want to say the evil one, but if you're doing, okay, so if everybody is praising you and following you and glorifying you, then you're probably not doing something right.
That's right.
But if you're getting a little resistance, rejection, disagreement, you know, then maybe you should keep doing what you're doing.
One other thing I like to
Yes,
mention is that there is still thousands and thousands of healings through that hospital. It's one of the largest hospitals in Italy and all of Europe almost.
Right.
It still is a charity hospital, and it's incredible the volume of people that go there and get healed. And that was his whole mission, was to heal people.
And that is a great mission.
That is,
And that is a mission that continues after his death.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
Yeah, it's a great
until-
mission, yeah.
Exactly, exactly. You've been an amazing group, really. I'm amazed that you would even, for me to leave my house at 7 o'clock at night, there's gotta be some good reason, you know? If I had known that Father O'Neill was gonna be here, I mean, I would have come sooner. But really, I really appreciate the time you took on, but obviously your spiritual journey, right? Because that's what we all want to be saints, right? We maybe can't be Padre Pio, but we could imitate his prayerfulness, his devotion to Mary, to Rosary, to acts of, to honesty, to acts of piety, to acts of charity, right? I mean, a little bilocation wouldn't hurt. But, I mean, but aren't we often two places in one time at the same time? It feels like it. Sometimes it feels like it. So, any other thoughts or takeaways?
Mute.
Oh, he's speaking.
Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.
Bob, we want to thank your young assistant.
I don't know where I would be without Deacon Dang. For this whole dang thing. Yes. Thank you. Just coffee, water, refreshments, or
Thank you.
thank you.